Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Sin Bin. We are back with esteemed guest Andy Bassford for the second installment of our interview with him. If you have not seen part one yet, please click on the link below, posted in the description, and watch it. So for now, we are going to pick up where we left off. So you were telling us the story of how your 4-year-long tour with Lloyd Parks and We the People began. This was your first North American tour. Um, okay, so you got the gig and you landed it with We the People and you did a tour throughout North America, US and Canada, correct?
Uh, that's that's correct, but I need to add some detail for some context for people.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Um, I joined the band in January '81, having been recommended to Lloyd by other members of the band who I did sessions with or had seen me doing sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd seen the band play, and I was an enormous Lloyd Parks fan, so this was a huge thrill for me. And so Jimmy Becker, whom I replaced, played through the end of New Year's 1980. And at that time, I was in America touring with Culture. I went home
Joseph
for
Hill,
Christmas and I
right.
picked up this tour. The story's on my website. It's hilarious. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you went and read it. I it's there's I have some wild stories, but that is definitely one of the wildest ever. So um so anyway, I joined We the People, and the first gig was, oh, let me explain what We the People did and what it was to be in the top band in Jamaica in 1981,
Mm-hmm.
because this is really relevant to everything else. So We the People was Lloyd's band. He had assembled it, put the people together, cleaned out his bank account. He told me he had 27 cents left in his bank account when he started the band, and he had a wife and family. So, or I don't remember if he had a wife and family, but he definitely had responsibilities, and it was a bold move. He was a popular session bass player, and he'd been in some club bands. And during the 70s, there was a lot of live music in Kingston. There was a place called Red Hills Road, which had a whole strip of nightclubs. If you think like uh, Bourbon Street in New Orleans or something, whatever street in a major city has got where
Mm-hmm.
that's, oh, Cleveland is the flats. That's a great analogy. It's in Cleveland, on the east side of the river. There's a string of nightclubs called the Flats. And there's just lines of them. Fort Lauderdale has one. A lot of cities have them. So in Kingston, it was Red Hills Road, and Lloyd played in a band with Sly Dunbar of the Sly and Robbie,
Mm-hmm.
and they were called Skin, Flesh, and Bone.
Okay.
And Robbie was down the street playing in a club called Evil People, and I forget the name of his band, but Sly and Robbie met on a break on Red Hills Road because, they were playing in adjacent clubs. That was the first time they met, and they went to hear each other play and decided they were going to team up. So Red Hills Road is hugely important to everything that follows. And Lloyd Parks, the other people in the band were Sly, Doogie Bryan, who is, Twisted guitar player forever, was the guitar player. Ranchi was the guitar player at one point. Tarzan was the keyboard player. So Lloyd was what people did up through the 1980 election. Well, actually, the late 70s, when the violence started getting bad in Kingston, you played the studios at night. I'm sorry, you played the clubs at night. You worked the studios during the day. Kingston geographically is pretty small. There's like 1 million people in it. When I went back later with Monty and looked at it, I was really surprised how small it was, because it wasn't necessarily small if you were walking everywhere like I was, but the major studios were all within a couple of miles of each other, and Red Hills Road was kind of not far from that. So geographically, everything is, say, within a 3-mile radius.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody had club gigs. The big hotels were in Kingston. People, the house band at the what is it called? It was the Hilton then. These hotels change names a lot, but the big house band in Kingston was the Caribs, which was Jackie Jackson's band. The bass player with Toots and the Maytals and the great session bassist. And there was a Courtly Manor had a house band, and people, the sessions would start around 10 in the morning, and you would do sessions until it was time to go to your gig. And some guys had gigs in Ocho Rios, which is 30 miles away from Kingston. I don't remember, but it's at least an hour drive. So you had to be done with your session in time to get to your gig in Ocho Rios. Then you drive back and be ready to start doing sessions at 10 in the morning again. And guys did this 5 sessions. Studios you ran usually 5 days a week, and often Sunday was the day off. But guys were working around the clock between sessions. If you were one of the clique, you were doing sessions and recording. Playing club gigs, all week. And actually, Hartford was the same, except we didn't have a studio scene. But live music was omnipresent in the 70s. Hard to imagine now. There was nothing else for people to do. We didn't have the internet.
Right.
You went to a club, you went to the movies, or you stayed home and watched TV or read books. That was kind of what you did.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the musicians pretty much who were not touring regularly out of overseas were doing this. Now, as the violence got worse and worse and worse, the live scene dried up almost completely. There were no club gigs in Kingston at all when I got there, except for the Caribs at the it wasn't the Pegasus, it was the Hilton then. And that was the most secure hotel in downtown Kingston. That was where all the famous people, like the big businessmen stayed. So they had that locked down security wise. So that was the only place it was safe to have a band. There were one-off stage shows by individual promoters, but there were no residencies anymore, right, except on the North Coast, the North Coast where all the tourists are. So, musicians were. So by 1980, a lot of good musicians that were not, a lot of good musicians went to the North Coast because it was steady and safer. Other musicians were touring overseas and making good money, like the Wailers guys. But then, of course, Bob died right at the beginning of 1980. So they were adrift. And they started doing sessions again. When they were with Bob, they were generally too busy to do other people's sessions. But after he died, they were just, it was sad. That was when I met them. And it was really just heartbreaking to see these musicians that I idolized, shell-shocked. So in the context of that, what We the People did was, the only place we played in Kingston generally was, in terms of like live shows with artists, was a place called Skateland, which is hugely important in the dancehall story. And I'll get to that soon. I'm checking the clock. But We the People, the work was what the top band in Jamaica did was a very strange combination of things. During the day, we were doing sessions. Sometimes together. The horn section usually did sections as a unit. The famous Dean Fraser was the saxophone player. And he did if somebody needed a sax solo, he was the guy. But very often, Dean, Nambo, and Chico, the horn players, would do sessions as a section. And sometimes just Dean and Nambo would do it. Like the Junjo, like the Wailing Souls album that everybody loves, Firehouse Rock. They're all over that one. That's Dean and Nambo on all the songs, all the horns of them. And they were really busy because they were the first Jamaican horn section that really played in tune. Plus, they all studied with the same teacher, which is one of the reasons they all played in tune. And he emphasized a beautiful sound and ensemble playing and intonation. There are stories about him, but I have to leave them out. Anyway, his name was Babe O'Brien. They all studied with him. And Nambo had studied with Melba Liston at the Jamaica School of Music. And, you know, she was a trombone player, and Nambo was a trombone player, and they hit it off personally and politically. And Nambo is basically like her chauffeur, as well as, you know, pupil and everything else. They were just buddies. They went everywhere together. She was gone by the time I got there. But anyway, they had this beautiful sound. They played together. At one point, We the People had two trombones, which was a fantastic sound. But one of the guys had emigrated before I joined. And so the horn section was real busy. Lloyd was busy. Bo P was busy. Bubbler, the keyboard player, was really busy. Everybody wanted Bubbler. I was working my way in. Ruddy Thomas, the singer, was one of the Joe Gibbs engineers, so that was his day job. He was in the studios all day. Plus, he sang background vocals and played percussion for people. And the only guy who really didn't do a lot of sessions was Devon, the drummer, because he really didn't like them. He didn't enjoy them, and he didn't, you know, he did some. He played on some big records. He played on Love Has Found Its Way for Dennis Brown, for example. He certainly could have done them, but he didn't like them, so he didn't do them. So anyway, during the day, 5 days a week, sessions, or looking for sessions, or hoping for sessions. The gigs were either multi-artist shows, usually at Skateland, but not always. And Skateland was a roller rink. It was in Halfway Tree, which was one of the main transportation hubs of Kingston. There were three of them. There was the parade, which was downtown, closer to the water. That's where Idler's Rest was. And that's real Kingston. The next one was Crossroads, which is technically, I think, in St. Andrew. And that was the middle one. And then Halfway Tree was the northernmost one and furthest away from downtown. And they were important because nobody in Jamaica had cars then, really, unless they were pretty well off or they used it for business. So everybody took buses or vans. The whole dollar van thing in Brooklyn, that comes from Jamaica. That, you know, when I came up here and that started showing up, I just started laughing because because, you know, right. It's a totally Kingstonian thing.
Right.
And
it's like the Jamaicans invented like ride share.
There you go. More pretty much, at least, you know, like the roots version of rideshare. We'll call it that. So, and there was a public transportation system, and it was a lot like Mexico. Buses went everywhere. You might have to wait a while, but you could go pretty much everywhere. Any relatively sized village in Jamaica, eventually you could get there on a bus, or a van would go there, or both. And so, depending on where you were going, if you were leaving Kingston, you would leave from one of these different transportation hubs. I first lived in Portmore, which is across the harbor from Kingston, was this, as a suburb. Mm-hmm. And to get to Kingston, I could either take a bus that would drop me in Halfway Tree, or another one that would drop me at Crossroads. I couldn't take one from Halfway Tree because there wasn't a route that ran to Portmore. The one downtown was the biggest hub. That all the people from out of Kingston, like far out of Kingston, most of the play buses ended up there. And this is how people got to Kingston to get into the business. You know, if they lived in the country, they would take a bus. take another bus to the studios, wait around and hope somebody heard them, and then take a ride, go back to the country or whatever. But the public transportation system in Kingston is hugely important to the story of reggae through the 80s, at least. And it explains a lot of the way things were operated. The fact that nobody had cars. I'm exaggerating, but nobody had cars and nobody had phones. I think I talked about that before. So the transportation hubs were really important. And Kingston, Halfway Tree had Skateland, which really was a roller rink. And during the day, it was a roller rink. And at night, they hosted sound systems. And every 6 weeks or so, the guy who owned Skateland, who ended up being a huge fan of mine, this wonderful character named Jingles. He was a big guy with these square gold glasses and big smile, like a huge presence, real tough guy, had to be, but also very warm and absolutely adored music. And he had money because he had a roller rink, and that was a great business in Kingston. So, and the sound systems all played there, and he had the bar. So, you could go see.
All right. So now the big picture is coming together.
Okay.
Not
Yes.
not trying to interrupt, but I'm just saying that, like, for the people who are trying to figure out what the relationships are, the sound systems used to be local neighborhood things that existed all through Jamaica, but now we are getting to the point where this is starting to be institutionalized and people are starting to make money off of it. And
Well, they were making money off it from day one, or it wouldn't have persisted. But
right,
as the technology improved, and as even in the Coxon's days as a sound guy, I think they occasionally went other places and did shows. But not every sound system could do that because the speakers then were, oh, this is God. Just I'll defer that. But anyway, the connection between me and all this was Channel One was pretty much dominated by Roots Radix, and those were the first guys I linked up with. And they were making. There was a big difference. There were basically four kinds of reggae in 1980.
okay,
There was the international kind, which Americans know best, like the triumvirate was Bob Marley and the Wailers, Jimmy Cliff, and Third World. Other people had shots at it, but those were the three that persisted. So Americans of my era who didn't dig further think of one of those three artists when you talk about reggae. And that had effects on session musicians too, because if Bob needed a guy, Bob took several people out of Jackson's band at the Caribs. Towder left to play with the Rolling Stones, and he went to the it was the Sheraton. That's what it was. It wasn't the Hilton. It was the Sheraton. He went to the Sheraton, and Tyrone was playing in the band. And he took Tyrone. And a club gig was a club gig or a hotel gig was relative to Jamaican society a middle class job.
right,
Pretty much. You made way more than the average Jamaican in a resident band. The dollar figures are a little vague, but in 1980 it was $2 Jamaican to $1 American, more or less. So when I played on the North Coast in 1980, I made $300 Jamaican a week, which was 150 US, which wasn't awful in America at that time. If you were single and didn't mind a roommate, you could do just fine on 150 a week. In Jamaica, a civil servant might take home $100 a week. Any job with a paycheck, it was kind of a middle class job. Like if somebody issued you a paycheck, you were middle class. If you got paid in cash, You were probably
Right.
you probably weren't. But the people, um, oh, um, to skip down the road, once I got married and my wife moved to Jamaica with me, well, it wasn't that order, but anyway, uh, in 1983 or 1984, she got a job teaching school, went to NYU for an education degree. She was teaching school on Hope Road, right near Tuffnong, and it was a very elite private elementary school. She was making 400 Jamaican a week, which at that point was 100 US. I could make 400 an hour playing sessions. I could
Right.
make her weekly salary in 1 week. And if I'd been on the North Coast, I probably would have been making 600 a week at that point.
Okay.
So, this being in Jamaica was, a musician in Jamaica was seen as not just a super important cultural position, but also, you made real money compared to most of the people you were dealing with. Okay, so getting back
So
to the dance thing.
let's stay focused. We were talking about
Yeah,
Skateland and
yes.
Roots
So
Radix.
okay, so I was recording with Ruth Radix, and one of the things Junjo always used to say was he used to say two things before every session started, basically. Make it dance off, and nobody no fuck with the musician then. And people paid attention when Junjo spoke, even though, he was a small guy, but he was not somebody you trifled with. And I didn't know what keeping a dance hall meant. I knew what don't fuck with the musicians meant, and that was a thrill, like, because everybody fucks with us,
Mm-hmm.
and Junjo never did. He was one of the best guys about paying out of everybody. I don't know how he was with the artists, but he was great with the session guys. So after a while, I started asking people, well, what is this? What is dance hall? And they'd say it's the music that's played in the dances. And I went there dances, and they said, and I all I knew about sound system culture in America was like dub albums, because I didn't, and there were dances in Hartford, but I didn't know about them, and they didn't have live musicians, so why would I go?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if there was a reggae band that came to Hartford, I was there unless I was working, but dances, I didn't understand how important it was.
Right.
So,
There
um,
wasn't there wasn't any dance hall coming to Hartford, Connecticut in 1980.
no, there was, but I
There
didn't know,
was.
but I wasn't interested in it. I wanted to learn how to play it, and you can't learn how to play it by watching some guy put records on a turntable.
Got it.
You can learn a lot about it from a listening perspective and a cultural perspective, but you can't learn how to play it. And that's what I was there to do.
Right.
So all this stuff went right over my head in Hartford. I could have gotten into it in Hartford if my orientation had been different. But after a while, I was really there to learn. I was amazed that I got as far as I did being a participant. I'm still amazed, but I was really there because I want to learn how to play the stuff correctly. And my academic training said go to original sources. Well, I had made it to the original sources. I was reading, I was learning the texts, and clearly dance hall was a part of the urtext that I had known nothing about, or what I did know, I didn't realize that it was part of the thing. So I asked some of the musicians. Some of them said, "Oh, it's what they play in the dances." And some of the older guys said, "Oh, it's terrible. It's the worst of reggae." And I thought, well, Junjo keeps asking for it, and I don't know what it is. Let me go to a dance and make up my own mind.
There you go.
Lo and behold, the second gig I did with We the People was at Skateland. And what happened was, and this was true of every show in Skateland, Jingles would open up about 6 o'clock, when people got off work. And he had a sound system. he hired, one of the sound systems. He might have had his. I think he had his own sound system. I don't remember exactly, but there was a sound system playing in Skateland from 6 o'clock, and it was a roller rink, so there were some, what are those things called? Uh, there were bleachers, so you could watch your friends skate if you didn't want to skate, but there was no seating. So he had a ton of folding chairs. So at 6 o'clock, the sound system would play. People would start setting up the chairs because the audience was all sat on folding chairs, and the PA company would come in. It was always Audiophone. They were like the one company in Jamaica that was capable of handling this stuff, and they were great. They were so good, and they of course had worked with We the People a ton of times before I got in the band. So Audiophone was in there setting up the PA, and Lloyd had told me sound check was 8 o'clock. Of course, I came early because I was so excited. And so I saw heard the sound system playing and saw the people setting up chairs. And Audiophone was just about ready to go. The big speakers up, and Skateland and they had a stage, like a they had kind of a concrete thing. I think there's a Gregory Isaacs video where you can see it on YouTube. There's a movie called Land of Look Behind that you can find on YouTube. This is very relevant because these German guys came to Jamaica and tried to do this really nutty documentary. Yeah. But if you want to know what Kingston was, it's not a good movie, but the footage they got of Kingston, I kept stepping over these guys every place I went. They showed up in, I think, June of 1981, or May, 2 or 3 months after I was in We the People. These guys from Germany showed up. So you can actually see me playing with Louis Lepke. Oh, dance hall, here we go. You can see me playing with Louis Lepke at Skateland. You're familiar with Louis?
I am not.
Oh, you'd love him. Oh my God. Supercat looked up to Louis Lepke. If you mentioned Louis Lepke to Supercat or any of the 90s guys or 80s, or any of the later 80s guys, they would go, yeah, man. Louis didn't record a lot, but he was one of the top sound system DJs. Mm-hmm. And the big stage shows had anywhere from, I was describing the We the People gigs, but which I'll sum up briefly, but we're into dance hall, so let's stay there. Mm-hmm. So you can actually see this stuff if you look up Land of Look Behind on YouTube. You see like a tiny, I'm in there for like a second, mm-hmm. wearing, of all things, a pink shirt, a pink polyester shoot and platform shoes from my 70s cover band days because I had no stage clothes and no money. And that was the closest thing I had to a stage outfit. So there I am with my guitar in this horrible pink shirt and the platform shoes, which fortunately you can't see. Mm-hmm. But I'm in there for a second and we're backing Louis Lepke. And Bob Marley had just died. So he's doing a tribute to Bob Marley. And you can hear 80s dance hall at its best in Louis Lepke. He was one of the cats. And then later on, there's this magnificent performance by Gregory with Ruth Radix. And that particular night,
Gregory Isaacs?
Yes.
Gregory Isaacs, okay.
Ruth Radix was assembled to be his band, and they didn't have a lead guitarist. And I found out decades later from Style that they knew they needed a lead guitarist, and the two candidates were Dwight Pinkney, who was in Zap Pow at that time. They were the previous top band in Jamaica, but mm-hmm. they kind of splintered, Mm-hmm. The horn section went with Bob Marley, and that was kind of the end of it. I told you Bob took people out of all the other bands. And so Dwight was around playing sessions. He was one of the first guys I met. He's still a friend. He sent me as a sub when for one of his sessions. He was double booked, and he gave me the less lucrative session 2 weeks after he met me, to show you how he hit it off. He and I hit it off, and the way the other guitar players, with one exception, may or may not get to that, but the other guitar players were all like Dwight. Oh, a guitar player. What do you know that I don't know? Right. And I was the same way. That I'd come down there to meet the guitar players. So I was very surprised and thrilled that they wanted to meet me too. Because they had the same problem I did. They didn't know how to play rock. They heard it, but they didn't know anybody. They'd never seen anybody who could actually do it in the room with them. Okay, so jumping back to the dance hall. In Land of Look Behind, that particular night, we were double billed with Ruth Radix, and they really only played live with Gregory. In the studio, they recorded with everybody, but they only did live shows with Gregory. We backed up every artist in Jamaica that didn't have their own band, which was almost all of them. If you weren't signed to a label, you didn't have your own band, basically. So I ended up playing with everybody, which just accelerated the session work for two reasons. First of all, the artists met me at rehearsal and heard me play with the band. The second thing is all the producers used to come to Skateland to hang out. So the producers would come to see the show, and they'd see the new guitar player and go, "Oh, I like that. I could use that."
Right.
So
So it was just like a tunnel acceleration. You managed to play in front of every single person that was out there.
I had no idea about any of this. I was just like, I'm in, and I'd fallen in love with them when Jimmy had taken me to see them. So I was already like the world's biggest We the People fan, and then I ended up in the band, and that was the zenith. That was more than I couldn't imagine a better phenomenon, like a better.
So I'm just trying to summarize here. There were all these musical forces that were coming together in this one place.
Exactly.
And you went off on one tangent, even though there were plenty of other tangents that were happening.
Well, Skateland is really, Channel 1 is ground zero. Skateland is like when the meteor lands. I'm mixing metaphors brutally here, but all kinds of stuff came together at Skateland for me, career-wise and personally, and also learning-wise. Remember, my whole goal was I didn't think I would have a career in this stuff.
Right.
I just really want to learn how to play right because I was crazy about it. So, this is, I was 26, and it's like I'm in the best band in Jamaica. Like,
right.
I'm just looking around, but at the same time, I don't really have any money. I'm just getting started as a session player. Lloyd paid fairly, but the gigs were sporadic. Sometimes there were 1,000, like, piled on top of each other, and then you'd go all of January without doing anything. It was weird. So anyway, getting back to Skateland, the particular night that's in Land to Look Behind, and since people can go look at that, I'll talk a little more about it. You can actually see the stage at Skateland, which was kind of part of the bleachers, if I remember right, and it was concrete, and then there was this platform in front of the concrete stage where the artists or the vocal groups or the DJs would stand, and We the People stood on the concrete, which is a little bit lower. See exactly what it's like in the movie. And the movie ends, and if you want to, you can just skip to the last 10 minutes of it. But really, you should just, if you're interested in the stuff, it's worth looking at the whole thing. Everybody you see in it is somebody I used to run into all the time. Everybody in Kingston, pretty much. And so that particular, what We the People did was the promoter would book the artists, none of whom had their own band. And depending on the promoter and the time of year and what artists were hot on the radio or in the dance halls, which are two completely different things, that would influence who he booked. And there are people like Delroy Wilson who were so popular, even if they didn't have a hit, they were good people to put on the show. The Tamlins had hits and they were great live. They were some of our favorite people to play with. Talk about a group that never got their due. Tamlins, top of the list. Oh my God. And they were fun people. Everything about them was great. They usually saw Delroy Wilson. He was on a lot of them. Philip Fraser is a big dance hall singer. Maybe not well known. Another guy not nearly as well known as he should have been. He was on a lot of them. And Jimmy Riley would be on them. He was big then. Father of Taurus for those people, the younger people. And we would back all of them. So it could be anywhere from 6 to 12 or 15 artists. And we would get one rehearsal. And there was no music. Mm-hmm. And here I am. I didn't even fully understand patois at that point. Everybody talked in patois. They weren't necessarily catering to me. I had to figure out how to memorize the songs for 12 artists in one rehearsal. I'm already nervous about being in the band. I don't want to get fired. There's every reason to fire me. And Lloyd got a lot of flack for hiring me, which he did Lloyd is really my musical father. I often refer to him as that. And he shielded me from a lot of stuff that was going on that, as he put it when he finally told me years later, he said, it would have really I knew it would really upset you. You would take it to heart and you didn't need that. I'm the band leader. It was my job to deal with it. It was my job. It wasn't your job to deal with it. It was my job. And I never told you because I knew how upset you'd be. He was 100% right. I would have been devastated. It wouldn't have stopped me, but I would have been devastated. So, but in any case, whenever you get a gig, your first concern, if you have any sense at all, is how do I not get fired? Some gigs you want to get fired from. This was the gig this was the dream gig of, my adult life. So, we have the first show at Skateland, and the sound system is already playing, and I'm starting to hear some of the stuff, and none of it was on the radio, and I'm going, they're playing all these records that aren't on the radio.
Yeah,
they're not on the radio. And JBC at that point, there were two stations: JBC, Jamaica Broadcasting Corporation, and RJR, Radio Jamaica Rediffusion, which is an old 50s thing. I have a story about Alton Ellis on my website, and that explains what rediffusion was. So I don't need to go into it here. Anyway, we came out and we played with the artists. And the noteworthy thing about that is during the second song, Lloyd asked me to take a solo. We were playing Rock for Rock, and we always warmed up with a couple of instrumental songs so that Audiophone could make sure the system was right and we could make sure we could hear everything before the artists came on and the real part that, and we, the people, would always do a couple of songs. Lloyd would do one or two. He was always the last guy. Ruddy Thomas, the lead singer, would go before him and he would do one or two of his hits. And Dean would always sing a song, and sometimes Nambo or Bopi would sing a song, but usually it was Dean, then Ruddy, then Lloyd. So we would do an opening set, but we always opened with the one or two instrumentals just to, get going, because it's going to be a long night. So the first thing was M16, which you can, Soldier Man Rock. That was a really popular dancehall rhythm. Everybody used to
play. The M16 rhythm. Yes.
Yeah,
yes, I'm familiar with that. Song. Yes. Yeah.
That was a big dancehall song.
Right.
And I didn't know. It was just the tune I had to learn to open the show. So anyway, during the second song, Rockford Rock, Lloyd, Dean takes the solo, and then Lloyd points at me, and he points to this platform, where the singers are. And I figured, okay, I'm soloing, I should go up on the platform. And Dean was stuck to his mic, in the horn section, but I had a cable, so I figured, okay, I should go up on the platform and take a solo. So before I play one note, a guy throws a beer bottle at me with the
Oh,
beer
Jesus
still in it,
Christ. Oh, my God.
and he missed. And I'm going, okay. I mean, I can't say I'm surprised. Maybe I'm surprised it didn't happen before, maybe, but oh, okay, it's like this. All right. So I was going to play all kinds of fancy shit, and oh, my language, I'm sorry. But I figured, let me just make sure I can hear myself. So I went, I've got the guitar here. I can tell you exactly what I played because I remember it. You know,
Right on.
oh, we have the acoustic. That'll be better. All right. So anyway, you know, rock for rock.
Yes.
Okay, it's all right. So this is going on. The beer bottle goes by. It went on the right. I remember very well. No,
Yes.
but we didn't solo over that part.
Okay.
We're just soloing over the two fourths. Dean is going, full Dean phrase. He's just, taking no prisoners from note one, which is always the way he plays. And, and I'm completely like, oh my God, I got to follow that. So Lloyd points to me and I'm going, and he didn't tell me I was going to take a solo. He just pointed at me. And I walked up in the stage, and I had my guitar and I'm picking what's the line? Okay, take a solo. I stop. I go up there. Beer bottle goes right over my shoulder. The beer flies out and hits me. I mean, this guy was mad. He didn't even finish the beer. So and the people at Skateland were real roots Jamaicans, mostly the ghetto people for the most part. So this ghetto Jamaican is angry enough at the interloper to throw his red, and it was red stripe bottle too. I remember a lot of this. And the beer came out and hit my shoulder, but the bottle didn't hit me, thank God. And I went, and then I expected a barrage, but that seemed to be the only one. So this all happened much quicker than I'm talking about it, but it seemed like it was in slow motion. Beer. Oh, okay. And so after I got myself settled, I said, let me just play something to make sure. I was going to play a bunch of stuff, and I said, let me just play a couple of notes to make sure I can hear myself. So I went, and Skateland went, Wah! And I went, really? Well, they liked those two notes. I was going to play a bunch of stuff, but they liked those two notes. Let me do it again. And they went nuts. So then, I played some other stuff, and I didn't believe me, I did not dwell out on the solo. I wanted to get back to the concrete as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But, a guy, that was my introduction to Skateland. They heard me play and they loved me. And, so the first show, it was a blur because I was just trying to remember all the songs. And then while we were packing up, and this is where the other part of the dance hall thing comes in, the sound system started up, but this time they would play, and this is the way the dance hall went. Super important. I don't know. I was in a bus with Toots or a van for the 90s, so I don't know what it was like in the 90s, but in 1981 in Jamaica, and I'm not sure when it started. I mean, it started, probably the birth of modern dancehall would be U-Roy, although it existed before that. But U-Roy was the first DJ to really take over. I think he had 5 songs on the charts at once.
Okay.
So everybody wanted to be U-Roy, and then everybody wanted to be Big Youth, and I'm brutally massacring the history, but to get to 1981, it was I packed up and I was coming down from the excitement of surviving my first gig at Skateland, and I noticed that a lot of people were still there, and I went, why would they stay after the show? The show is done. It's 2 or 3 in the morning, whatever it was. Theoretically, it started at 8. It never
Yeah.
started before 10. The stage show I'm talking about.
Right.
It took that long for the critical mass to come in and everybody, So these things went anywhere. Maybe one might have started at 9, but it went 9 or 10 to 3 or 4 in the morning by the time you got through all these artists. So, I'm on this complete adrenaline high, my second gig with the band, or third, and I've survived Skateland. I've got my guitar packed up. I went to the bar and got a beer, tried to calm down. I'm thinking, okay, I can, where was I then? Yeah, I was in Kingston by then. I can afford a cab to get home. Instead of taking the van, it's late at night. I shouldn't walk home at 4 in the morning. Let me splurge on a cab. So I'm thinking all these thoughts, and I've noticed that most of the crowd is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going, why are they still here? And then the sound system starts up again, and this time they're into what dancehall really was. They would take a tune like Answer. I'm trying to think of Answer was. I'm trying to think of what was big in 1981. M16. No, we didn't start with M16. That we started with the Harold Butler song. You can hear it on the live Dennis Brown show from '81. Blanking on the name. No, maybe we started. I forget. Anyway, it doesn't matter. What was going on was the sound system started up again, but they would play a popular tune. Diseases was one. I just played it with Michigan the other night. And that's White, of course.
That's
what is that? It's talk.
Right. I mean, Yellow Man covered it.
Oh, that was a huge. That everybody.
Yellow Man covered it with Gate Man.
Yeah.
And yes.
Okay, so yeah, it was something like that.
Josie Wales covered it too.
Oh yeah. Boy, was he a character? My
right.
God. Yeah, he was. Okay, so this is what happened. They played the sound system played Diseases or something like that. And they played the A side, and people are bopping along. And then they flip over and play the B side, which is the dub. And a guy comes up and in the booth and takes the vocal mic and starts DJing, and everybody starts going nuts.
Yes.
And then they played the B side again, and another guy comes up and he starts DJing.
Right.
And then a third guy and a fourth guy. And then a singer comes up and they're all singing and DJing.
And you've never seen this before.
No. This is like
you never. I mean, this is
it's like going to Mars.
What you're describing right now is where I entered into reggae.
Okay, so
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so again for the younger people, turntables, and they had I think 2, but they maybe they had I don't remember if they had 1 or 2. You can see it in the pictures. Beth Lester has a wonderful book about dancehall if you're not familiar with it, like a photographic book.
Mm-hmm.
And she and her husband Dave Kingston live in Toronto, and they know so much more about dancehall than I do. She wrote a book about it with pictures that everybody who's interested in the stuff should just buy. It's priceless. It's so good. It's one of the best books I've ever seen about reggae. Sugar Minott was in their wedding. I mean, something like that. They were, they were way deeper into dancehall than I ever was. I'm interested in it as a musician. They were interested in all of it. I was listening to the DJ and I would go, well, his time is great. Pitch is kind of a weird. I understand a little bit of what he's saying. Like I'm thinking about him like he's, like a musician thinks, and the crowd is all going,
right,
right, all this kind of stuff. So I'm watching this, and they play the B side anywhere from 3 to 4 times, And then they put another record on, and the same thing happens. They play a
Yeah.
different popular, a different tune that I've heard before, and they flip the record over, and another set of guys comes out and does the same
Right.
thing. And
And
then
they
I
just,
realized that all the people gathered around the control tower, the place where the
mhm.
turntable is, are DJs and with a few singers, and people are standing in line. And I went, oh my God,
Right.
this is as popular as the live show. It's more popular because people stayed afterwards to hear it.
Right.
Maybe they were just, sitting through the live show to get to this.
So can you give me a minute to inject some commentary? I'm
Sure.
just going to jump in here. So what you were witnessing in Jamaica in 1981 was a parallel to the same thing that was going on in the South Bronx projects at the same
Absolutely.
time. These were people who were mastering these technological sounds. And what they were doing is they were playing a popular rhythm with the vocals on the front side on the A deck, and then they were flipping it with the instrumentals on the B deck, and then people were coming in and they were filling. In America, they were filling with hip hop, but in Jamaica, they were filling with dancehall.
So I was very aware of hip hop as soon as it got recorded.
Okay,
The first hip hop tune I remember hearing was The Breaks,
the breaks, Curtis Blow.
which is a real important early record.
Mm-hmm.
And I I had read about it and I heard that and I really liked The Breaks, and I thought, and then I heard that he was hip hop. And there's a horrible rap by Debbie Harry on Rapture. She
Yes.
mentions
Oh my
Fab Five.
God. Yes.
She mentions Fab Five Freddy, and like
Yep.
uh, I would read about these people, but I had no idea what they were doing because it hadn't really gotten to Hartford yet until The Breaks. And I heard The Breaks, and I went, "Oh, I like that." Great. That was played by live musicians, but it was what's his name from Talking Heads is on it. Chris Franz is the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
T-Bone Wolf from Hall & Oates is the bass player on The Breaks. I forget who the guitar player is,
I
but
did not know.
I like,
I
when you
had no
actually,
idea that was true.
no,
Okay.
when you actually know what really happened, like you might have been there or you talked to somebody who's in the room when it happened, you find all these insane people dovetailing because it's music.
Right.
And Chris is a great, great drummer. He could have been a top session player had he decided to go that way. T-Bone Wolf was a top session player, and he's in the, one of the biggest bands of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous musician, gone way too soon. They're both white, but, in the studios particularly, it doesn't matter. It mattered for a long time in person, and there were, racism in the musicians union and all that stuff. But basically, the studios were integrated long before the rest of America because nobody could see who was playing.
Well, I don't know if you know this, and look, I know this is a tangent, but look, I've been drinking a little, and this is my setup, so I can do whatever I want. This is my flight of
Absolutely.
fancy. Cool Herc, the master of the South Bronx breaks, was actually a native Jamaican.
I was aware of that, but
He
other
he
people,
he had influence from watching this stuff in the dance hall before he moved to America, and he took the technological aspect of the A side vocal and the B side instrumental and the expanded dub and decided that he was going to use that as a party device in America, and that technique was really the birth of hip hop.
okay, I'm super not qualified to talk about hip hop, even though I've done some
Mm-hmm.
hip hop stuff. But in terms of the history, I left America when that was, like that was when I left.
You're right. Okay.
So I
So
can't tell
anyway,
you.
that's my
Or
flight of fancy. Go back.
right,
Sorry. My
my
apologies.
no, it's not. No, it's totally relevant, and people should know because it's it's a big part of the story.
Hmm.
Um, but what uh, but a parallel thing that was happening that I noticed without knowing any of the reasons for it was you started seeing these disco 12 inches.
Yes.
And the American ones would have the regular size, like
Hmm.
the 8 minute version for the club for dancing in the club, and then they have
Yes.
a radio version, and then they'd have an instrumental version or like some kind these other kinds of versions.
Yes.
And me with being a musician on a very limited budget, I would look at these things and go, why would I buy a 12-inch record with one song on it?
The reason you have a 12 inch is that you have the vocal on the front side, and then you have the acapella and the instrumental. So this way, if you wanted to do a dub, you could put the instrumental on one side, you could put the vocal on the other, and then you could expand it. And
And
then
you
if
can
you
cut
do
them in and
that,
out.
you can create a 45-minute beat, and then the people who are rapping or toasting on the breaks can come in and do whatever it is they're doing.
Sure. And there's also
This is fantastic. I gotta tell you,
there,
I'm
there,
having a good time. Go ahead.
okay, so there's also a technological reason for 12-inch 45s.
Go ahead.
And this for the younger people who didn't grow up with vinyl, this
Hmm.
is going to be probably new information unless you're already really into this. But uh, in from in the late 70s, um, a song could be popular in the clubs, and this started in the gay clubs. Um, the disco thing really started in the gay clubs. The DJs that were gay that were playing for those crowds at the Stonewall and places like that. They had tunes that really worked for that audience, and they would do things like cut the records together or whatever. And MFSB and Joe Tarsia, the Gamble and Huff, picked up on this and started releasing.
Yes. Kenny
Uh,
Gamble.
well, there's reasons for that, which was that band was so. They're one of my heroes, collective heroes. MFSB. We're talking about heroes. MFSB was my Bible once I got a little bit comfortable with session playing and I wanted ideas. These are for people who don't know. They played on the OJ's records. They played on the Stylistics records. They played on the Harold Melvin, Teddy Pendergrass records. Gives you a quick summary of them. And they were such a great band that the engineer, Joe Tarsia, couldn't bear to stop the tape after 4 minutes. He would just let the tape run.
Right.
And he would let it run and run and run because he couldn't stand to stop it.
It was
And
gold,
then
yeah.
and then they were sitting around, digging this. And in those days, recording was very much determined by the physical nature of vinyl, specifically with bass. Vinyl involves a needle going into grooves. And I'm not a huge expert on this, but bass grooves are wider than treble grooves. And there's a finite number of grooves you can squeeze onto a 7-inch record. There is
Oh,
a finite
I didn't
number
know
of
that.
grooves you
I
can
didn't know
squeeze
that.
onto a 12-inch record.
Uh-huh.
Albums were 12 inches, 45 singles were 7 inches, and they had an A side, which was one song, and a B side, which was um, which was basically without getting into it, it was a throwaway in most cases. And because of the physical nature of vinyl, after about the maximum amount you can put onto a 45-inch vinyl record without really significantly losing bass is 4 minutes. This is why.
I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about that. Okay.
Okay, so you'll love when I get to the 12-inch.
Right.
Okay, so um, the primary way that people learned about music in those days was either through the radio or through clubbing. And on radio is all about selling commercials, just like TV is. If you
Hmm.
see a sitcom without commercials, it's 11 minutes long instead of 30.
Right.
So the shorter your song was, the more commercials the station could squeeze in. So 60s records tend to be 3 minutes or less, and they wanted to land around 2:30, and that was because of radio. But when longer songs got popular, when the dance thing got to be more of a thing, and then the albums got popular and longer tracks, artists like the Beatles, Hey Jude is 7 minutes long, it's squeezed onto a 45. The bass response is not brilliant on the 45 version of Hey Jude.
Got it.
They did the best they could, but it wasn't a bass heavy record. They weren't playing it at the Stonewall Inn, or whatever the 60s equivalent of that was. But when the album artists who did longer tracks started becoming popular, or tracks became hits on the album version, and then they released it as a single, which started happening in the late 60s. They realized, a vinyl record can be 4 minutes, and we can still get the right bass on it, and it'll be short enough so radio will play it if it's really, really popular. So
I
that's why
see.
records went from 2:30 in the 60s to 4 minutes in the 70s,
Right.
in the early 70s. And then after this, Philadelphia discovery of, the band kicking butt for long periods of time, the R&B albums weren't like, like artist rock albums like Led Zeppelin.
Right.
They were singer oriented. They wanted every song to get on the radio. So they were used to doing, 5 4-minute songs per side, or, 3.5. Okay.
Hmm.
So now we get to the physical limitations of 12-inch vinyl. You start losing bass around 18 minutes. With
Right.
a great mastering engineer and a great mix, you can get away with 19 or 20. But you want 18 or less.
Right.
So you want you know, 3.5 minute to 4 minute songs.
Right.
You want 5 of them on the album on each side because of writing and publishing, and also to maximize, your chances at a hit. But you can't squeeze. If you squeeze more than 5 of them on a side, you're going to lose bass. For like the Allman Brothers live albums are way over
Okay.
those limits, but they're not bass
So,
heavy records.
all right.
So getting back
Let's
to this, the
yeah.
12-inch
Let's detour
45.
back to this. You have a an ability to do this on a 12-inch, and you create what it is you want on the A side. But what that means is if you have that distance on the A side, then you've got to fill the B side too.
Okay, yes, but you start losing bass at 18.
Right?
Guess what happens when you put 10 minutes on a side instead of 18? What happens? You can cut the master hotter. You can make the record louder,
I see.
more bass, because you now have more
I
vinyl
see.
per
Right.
groove.
Right.
So this started coming in around the time that Gamble and Huff started. Joe Tarsia started not being able to stop turning off the tape recorder. And somebody, and the Philly scene is a pretty small scene. It's a lot like Kingston. Everybody knew everybody. And a lot of these guys went to clubs. A lot of the disco people, a lot of them were, the producers were gay, or the artists were, or whoever was gay. And they were going to these clubs. And Soul Makossa was a big record because it was a long album cut. Originally, it was an album cut. The Mono Lubango thing that Michael Jackson sampled for "Want to Be
Hmm.
Starting Something." that was a big record in the gay clubs and the disco clubs because it was an album cut and it's this wonderful groove for however long the album cut is. And then they made a radio edit and got on the radio and it was a pop hit. But the original track was the long album track that the clubs picked up on. And some guy at a record company danced to it in a club and said, you know what, that could get on the radio. Let's get the rights to it and make an edit.
Okay, just another break for the audience. For people who are interested in this phenomenon, Nas has executive produced a series with Netflix called The Get Down,
Oh,
which
great.
describes all of this from about 1978 to 1980. The idea that an executive producer who is the fictional recreation of Kenny Gamble saying, we need to get this thing in the clubs where the fruits like it, and when that happens, it becomes a disco hit.
Okay, so
Anyway, go ahead.
So they did that, but they were thinking albums.
Yeah.
So probably Tarsia or some mastering engineer, who was witnessing this. And for people who don't know, even these days, the last thing that happens before you or I hear a record, whether it's vinyl, streaming, CD, before it gets released, it goes to a guy called the mastering engineer who basically takes everything that's been recorded and optimizes it for the best sound on every possible place you might want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredibly intense skill. You can get it done on the internet for $50, and it won't be bad. But to really get it right, there are not a lot of people in particularly with vinyl. You wanted specific guys, and mastering engineers often specified in genres. There's a guy named Howie Weinberg who is really popular.
Howie Weinberg, Masterdisc Studios.
Yeah, yes. There you go. Oh, yeah,
yes.
Masterdisc is one of the big studios, and they have one of the best rosters in the history of the universe. I used my
yes,
and I've cut. My record was mastered there, not by Howie, but the mastering engineer was the guy who had to make the 19-minute album side sound great on something that could only be ideally 18 minutes. And they had all kinds of tricks involving where I don't know what they did, but they used to make it work. So these guys were super valuable, completely unknown to the average person, even completely unknown to many of the people in the industry. They just knew there was a mastering engineer. They didn't know why they were important. So it was probably a mastering engineer who had, somebody must know this somewhere, but my guess is a mastering engineer or somebody who dealt directly with the mastering engineer, like the producer, somehow put these two things together. You want a track that will play in the gay clubs. Manufacturers are set up for 12-inch vinyl and 7-inch vinyl, which is like making cookies. You stamp it out. If you've ever been to a pressing plant, it's amazing. In Jamaica, the pressing plants were like right next to the studio, so you could actually cut your track and go around and see your record being printed a week later. Go around the back to the studio and see this. Harry J had a pressing plant. Dynamic had one. I think those are the only two left. There used to be more. And so the thing had to be physically made, but the mastering engineer was the guy who optimized it to be physically put into vinyl without getting into the process. So somebody at some point made this connection. One song on 12-inch, bass, yeah, let's do this. So they could pick the one song off the Gamble and Huff album that was the 18-minute killing groove, like Wake Up Everybody or something like that. Or what's another great one? The Intruders one, I Always Love My Mama.
Mm-hmm.
That's just killing for however long it is. Now that can be a 12-inch 45 single.
Wow.
But
you taught me something, man. In my entire life, I never even thought about that.
Okay, but we need a B-side.
Right.
Nobody's going to buy a record with one side. They're going to flip it over here and go, "What's wrong with this?"
Right.
So we need what? An
The
instrumental version with
instrumental.
no vocals. Just mute the
Instrumental.
vocal track and run another mix.
Right.
Give the mastering engineer both of them. This is side A. This is side B.
The
Done.
instrumental and the acapella. Because this way, if you have the instrumental and you have the acapella, if you want to extend a record into 45 minutes, you can play the hit, mix it with the instrumental, and then if you want to keep people going, you can put the acapella on the hook and keep going. So, like I said, what was going on in Jamaica was the same thing that was going on in the South Bronx at the exact same time.
And there were reggae disco 45s. And I own a bunch of them. They're great. If you ever see a reggae disco 45 of anybody you like, just grab it.
In my entire life, I have never seen a reggae disco 45.
Oh gosh, if we do another one, I'll try to have one with me before the there you can hear them on YouTube.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, dance hall is all 45s. 4 minutes, flip it over another 4 minutes. And there was this gap while you shifted DJs, but everybody in the audience was fine with it. You could go grab a beer quick or go to the bathroom or whatever and be back by the time they'd switched the mic and they were, a verse into the next one. So me as a musician witnessing this, I'm going, maybe this is dance hall. So I asked Dean, of course, who knows everything about everything. And, I said, Dean, is this dance hall? And he goes, yeah, man, you never know. I said, well, I've heard people talking about it. And I said, it's popular, right? And he goes, I'm bigger than we, man. This is the top band in Jamaica.
I'm bigger than
we, man. So Andy eventually will get the point at maybe not immediately, but eventually Andy gets the point. So I said, wow, if I really want to know what dance hall is, I can go to Skateland. Jingles likes me. People see me play there with We the People. I can go when they're having a sound system. So I started going.
Okay.
And eventually I realized that it was very similar to something I already loved and would never have connected with it. Jazz. What do you do with jazz? You play the melody. Then everybody in the band takes a solo. In the old days, they would take one chorus. So the first DJ is the first soloist. And, with the jazz tune, it's the same chords going around and around, even if everybody's playing over them. So in reggae, it's the A side with the vocal. That's like stating the melody. Then you turn the record over, and somebody comes up and takes the chorus. And then the record ends, and somebody else comes up and takes another chorus. I said, it's jazz. They have melody. These guys are improvising. They're taking choruses. It's like jazz with the Philharmonic, but with 45s. And then I got real into it. Oh my God. Now I get it. Now I'm starting to get it. And of course, the people, I got immediately how much people loved it, but I was starting to now get the musical end of it.
Right.
And it connected with something that I already loved. So I started becoming a huge fan and really checking out these different DJs. And if they were really popular, we would have to back them.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so the next step in the story is Firehouse.
All right, wait, hold on.